Beneath the fractured moon, a crown of frozen thorns drew first blood from the brow of the unwilling queen. The wind howled like a pack of forsaken wolves across the jagged peaks of the Silver Fang Mountains, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant fires. Ilara stumbled through the snowdrifts, her bare feet numb against the unrelenting white. Each step a betrayal of the body that had once known warmth in the heart of the pack. She was no longer the Omega whispered about in the shadowed halls of the Frostvale Citadel, the quiet healer who mended wounds with herbs and hushed prayers to the goddess. Now she was the pariah, the vessel of a curse none could name, her coronation a chain forged in secrecy and spite. It had begun at midnight, under that same fractured moon, when the Alpha King, her mate by ancient right, though never by choice, had placed the crown upon her head. The silver circlet, etched with lunar phases that gleamed like captured starlight, bit into her skin as if alive, drawing beads of blood that froze into crimson jewels against her pale temple. "You will be Luna," he had growled, his voice a rumble of thunder masked as decree, his eyes shadowed by the weight of a kingdom teetering on war. But Ilara had not knelt willingly. Her wrists had been bound with silken cords woven from the pelts of slain rivals, and the pack's elders had chanted invocations to bind her spirit to the throne. She was no queen, no beacon of the goddess's favor, merely the Omega whose blood sang with an old, hidden power, a pathfinder's gift that could unravel the veils between realms. They had chosen her not for love, but for survival, to anchor the Alpha's faltering rule against the encroaching shadows of rival packs. Rejection came swift as the blade of betrayal. Whispers had spread like frost across the great hall. She was unfit, a stain on the royal lineage, her lowly birth an insult to the ancient bloodlines. The coronation rite, meant to unite, had fractured everything. By dawn, the council had turned, their loyalties shifting like sand under storm winds. "She brings war," they hissed, pointing to the scouts' reports of banners unfurling on distant horizons. 3 kingdoms, the Ironclaw from the east, the Shadowpine from the south, and the Bloodmoor from the frozen north, all hungering for the crown that now marked her as both prize and peril. Ilara's pleas fell on deaf ears. The Alpha, his face etched with the guilt of a man who had sacrificed his soul for duty, could not meet her gaze. "Exile," the decree echoed, banishing her to the wilds beyond the citadel's wards. Left to the mercy of the mountains that devoured the weak, the snow clung to her tattered gown, once white silk, now ragged and stained with the mud of her flight. The crown, that cursed symbol, she could not remove. It adhered to her like a lover's vow turned venomous, its thorns pulsing with a faint, ethereal light that betrayed her position to any hunter with eyes sharp enough to pierce the blizzard. Ilara's breath came in ragged gasps, fogging the air before her, each exhale a prayer unanswered. The cold seeped into her bones, a relentless companion that mirrored the ache in her chest, the raw wound of rejection, not just from the pack, but from the mate who had claimed her body, yet never her heart. What was strength if not enduring the frost that sought to claim you? She had always been the healer, the one who bound fractures in flesh and spirit, but who would mend her now? Weavis echoed from the valleys below, not the triumphant calls of a hunt, but the mournful cries of sentinels marking borders grown porous with ambition. Ilara paused at the edge of a ravine, the wind whipping her dark hair across her face, carrying the metallic tang of blood from some unseen skirmish. She pressed a hand to her side, where a shallow cut from the guard's rough handling wept red onto the snow, staining it like spilled wine under moonlight. The crown warmed against her brow, an unnatural heat that fought the chill, as if the moon itself whispered secrets through its silver veins. Legends spoke of such artifacts, relics of the goddess, forged in the fires of creation to guide the lost. but this one felt like a shackle, a beacon drawing the wolves not to salvation, but to slaughter. In the distance, the silhouette of the citadel faded into the haze, its spires like jagged teeth against the stormy sky. Ilara's mind raced with fragments of the night before. The Alpha's hand trembling as he affixed the crown, the flicker of regret in his golden eyes, the way the pack's howls had twisted from reverence to rage. He was a king marked by guilt, his rule haunted by the ghosts of battles won through betrayal, yet even he could not shield her from the tide of politics that now drowned them all. 3 kingdoms declaring war by midnight, for her, or rather, for the power she unwittingly embodied. The Pathfinder's gift, dormant until the right awakened it, allowed her to glimpse paths untaken, futures woven like threads in the lunar tapestry. But visions offered no warmth, no refuge from the exile that stripped her bare. She trudged onward, the snow deepening to her knees, her body a vessel of exhaustion and unspoken fury. The wind carried flakes that stung like accusations, and in their dance she saw symbols of her fate. White as purity lost, cold as the isolation of her spirit. Yet beneath the despair, a spark flickered. The goddess's subtle hand, perhaps, urging her toward an unknown dawn. Ilara whispered to the moon, her voice lost in the gale, "If destiny crowns the broken, let it be with mercy, not thorns." The crown pulsed in response, a silent promise or warning as the mountains swallowed her whole. Far below, in the shadowed passes, the first torches of pursuers flickered to life, their flames dancing like hungry eyes in the night. The war had begun, and Ilara, the unwilling Luna, was its unwilling heart. The storm's fury deepened as Ilara crested the ridge, her legs trembling like birch saplings in the gale. The crown's thorns dug deeper into her scalp with every labored breath, a persistent throb that synced with the distant thunder of hooves, pursuers, or echoes of her unraveling world. She collapsed against a frost-laced boulder, the snow swallowing her form like a grave's embrace. The metallic scent of her own blood mingled with the crisp bite of pine, and in that moment of surrender, the moon fractured further overhead, casting splintered light across the ravine below. From the shadowed depths rose a figure, staggering through the drifts like a spectre unbound from some ancient curse. He was no mere hunter. His silhouette cut the night with the authority of forgotten thrones, broad shoulders draped in a cloak torn by claw and blade, its edges frayed like the banners of a fallen realm. Blood streaked his fur-lined mantle, dark and viscous, seeping from a gash across his ribs that spoke of recent betrayal. Ilara's instincts flared, a primal pull deep in her core, recognizing the scent of alpha essence laced with desperation. But fear coiled tighter, a serpent in her veins, urging flight even as curiosity rooted her in place. He emerged into the moonlight, and the world narrowed to the gold of his eyes, stormy and haunted, flickering with the same guilt she had glimpsed in the Citadel's hall. Thorn, the Alpha King, her mate by right, the one whose decree had bound and banished her. Yet here he was, not as conqueror, but as fugitive, his once impeccable armor dented and smeared with the mud of hasty escape. A sword hung loose at his hip, its hilt crusted with drying blood, and in his left hand he clutched a fragment of the royal seal, shattered like his resolve. The wind whipped his dark hair across a face etched with lines of torment, the weight of kingdoms pressing upon him like the mountains themselves. Ilara's heart stuttered, a wild drumbeat against the cage of her ribs. Instinct screamed connection. The mate bond, forged in the coronation's forbidden rite, hummed faintly beneath her skin, a thread of silver light she had long denied. But denial surged stronger, born of the raw wound of his rejection, the exile that still burned like frostbite. "You!" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread lost in the howl. He froze, his gaze locking onto her with the intensity of a predator sighting prey, yet softened by something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or the echo of regret. Thorn's steps faltered as he closed the distance, each one crunching the snow like brittle bones. Up close, the wound wept freely, staining the white ground with rivulets of red that steamed in the cold air. "Elara," he rasped, his voice gravel over silk, carrying the timbre of commands unspoken. He dropped to one knee before her, not in supplication, but exhaustion, his breath fogging between them like a veil. The crown on her brow caught his eye, its thorns gleaming accusingly, and a shadow crossed his features. Guilt, raw and unfiltered, the mark of a king who had bartered his soul for duty. She recoiled, pressing back against the rock, the stone's chill seeping through her gown. Fear warred with the instinctive urge to reach for him, to press her healer's hands to that gash and staunch the flow. But curiosity flickered, unbidden. What storm had felled this titan? "Why are you here?" she demanded, her words sharp as icicles, though her body betrayed her, leaning imperceptibly closer. The air between them thickened, charged with the scent of blood and pine, the moon's light weaving illusions of intimacy in the chaos. The council turned, he admitted, his golden eyes never leaving hers, stormy depths reflecting the fractured sky. Ironclaw's vanguard breached the eastern wards at dusk, ambush in the great hall. They came for the crown, for you. His hand twitched toward the wound, as if to hide the vulnerability, but he let it fall. "I fought, but betrayal runs deep. Your exile. It was to shield you, to draw their eyes from the heart of the pack. But the right bound us, Elara. I feel your pain as my own." The confession hung heavy, a confession wrapped in the night's chill, stirring the bond she had rationalized away as mere illusion. Instinct pulled at her, a gravitational force urging her to his side, to trace the lines of his face marred by scars old and new. Yet fear clamped down. Memories of silken bonds and chanting elders flooding back, the coronation's theft of her will, his gaze averted as the decree of banishment fell. "Shield me," she echoed, bitterness lacing her tone like venom in wine. "You crown me in thorns and cast me to the wolves. This," she touched the circlet, wincing as a fresh bead of blood welled, "is no shield, it's a lure." Curiosity gnawed, though. His presence stirred visions at the edge of her mind, glimpses of paths diverging under lunar light, the Pathfinder's gift awakening in his shadow. Thorn's expression fractured, guilt etching deeper furrows. He extended a hand, calloused and bloodied, not to claim, but to offer, a gesture resisted by the chasm of their shared wounds. The wind howled approval or warning, carrying weavios from the valleys, closer now, the clamor of war's vanguard. Blood from his side dripped onto the snow, blooming like roses frozen in time, a symbol of the life they might yet lose. Elara's pulse thrummed with denial, yet the connection pulsed insistent, born not of tenderness, but the raw alchemy of fear and unanswered questions. In his eyes, she saw the king's melancholy, the ethical core buried under duty's avalanche, a man fleeing his own throne, drawn inexorably to the exile he had wrought. As the first distant torches pierced the tree line, their flames flickering like accusatory stars, Elara met his gaze fully, the bond a fragile bridge over abyss. What was redemption, if not facing the storm together, even as the heart rebelled? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The blizzard's howl softened to a mournful dirge as Elara and Thorn descended into the ravine's shadowed embrace, the snow yielding like reluctant flesh beneath their steps. Her hand, small and chilled against his larger one, was a concession born of necessity, not affection, the bond's insistent tug a whisper she dared not heed. The crown's thorns pricked anew with every jolt, sending rivulets of warm blood trickling down her temple, staining her collar like tears of garnet under the moon's indifferent gaze. Thorn's wound wept in sympathy, the metallic tang of it mingling with the pine-scented wind, a shared sacrament of survival that bound them closer than any rite. They moved as one shadowed form through the narrowing pass, the mountain's granite walls rising like silent sentinels, etched with veins of ice that gleamed silver in the fractured light. Ilara's breath came in shallow bursts, her body protesting the cold that clawed at her ragged gown. But the Alpha's presence was a bulwark, his heat radiating through the cloak he had draped over her shoulders, torn and bloodied, yet carrying the faint musk of hearth fires and ancient oaths. Fear still coiled in her gut, a serpent uncoiling at the memory of his decree, the way his golden eyes had averted from hers in the Hall of Exile. Yet curiosity had deepened into something perilliar. A reluctant empathy, glimpsing the fractures in his regal facade, the king unmade by the very crown he had forced upon her. Distant Wivios shattered the fragile quiet, sharp, predatory calls echoing from the ridges above, the vanguard of Iron Claw's hunters closing in like wolves, scenting crippled prey. Thorn's grip tightened, pulling her into a crevice, half hidden by overhanging ledges of snow-laden rock. "Here," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her bones, guiding her into the mouth of a shallow cave. The entrance was a jagged scar in the mountainside, its interior a womb of stone, warmed faintly by geothermal breath rising from unseen depths. They slipped inside, the wind's fury muffled to a distant wail, the air thick with the mineral tang of earth and the acrid bite of their mingled blood. Ilara sank against the rough wall, her fingers trembling as she assessed his injury in the dim glow filtering from the entrance. The gash across his ribs was deep, claw marks from some rival's talons, the flesh ragged and inflamed. Instinct overrode denial. She was the healer after all, her hands moving of their own accord to tear strips from her gown's hem. "Hold still," she commanded, her tone edged with the authority of one who had bound countless wounds in the citadel's dim infirmary. Thorn complied, his broad frame tensing as she pressed the fabric to the laceration, staunching the flow that painted her palms crimson. The contact sent a jolt through her, a spark of the mate bond, electric and unwelcome, stirring visions at the periphery, paths forking under lunar arcs, one leading to shared ruin, another to an unforeseen alliance. His golden eyes watched her, stormy with unspoken burdens, the guilt etching lines around them like cracks in marble. "You shouldn't," he said softly, not pulling away. But his voice carried the weight of a man who had long borne solitude's crown. "This war is my folly, betrayals I sowed in the name of peace. The council's turn was inevitable. They saw the crown's power in you, not the pack's salvation." Empathy flickered in Ilara's chest, unbidden as she worked, her touch gentle despite the storm within. She saw it now, clearer than the blood on her hands. The ethical core of him. A king who chose duty over desire, melancholy threading his every breath, like the wind through pines. He had crowned her, not from cruelty, but from a desperate bid to anchor the realm against the encroaching shadows, the Pathfinder's gift in her blood, a beacon to unravel the veils of deception spun by rival alphas. The cave's depths offered scant refuge, its floor a bed of frost-kissed gravel that bit into her skin as she shifted closer to build a small fire. Thorn gathered brittle twigs from a hidden alcove, his movements deliberate, conserving strength for the threat circling outside. Sparks flew as she struck flint against steel, his dagger handed to her with a nod of trust, and soon flames danced, casting flickering shadows that played across his face like ghosts of battles past. The warmth was a fragile mercy, thawing the numbness in her limbs, but it illuminated the chasm between them. Her exile's raw ache, his fugitive's shame. "Why protect me now?" she asked, her voice a thread in the fire's crackle, curiosity laced with the barbs of betrayal. The crown warmed against her brow, pulsing in rhythm with the flames, as if the moon itself urged confession. Thorn stared into the fire, the golden light reflecting the torment in his eyes. "Because the bond reveals what duty blinded me to," he admitted, his words measured, philosophical in their quiet gravity. "What is strength if not choosing to mend what you've broken? I rejected you to spare the pack your light. Too bright for their shadowed ambitions, but in the hall's ambush, as blades sang and blood pooled, I saw the truth. 3 kingdoms war not for land, but for the destiny you embody. Shadowpine seers prophesy a Luna who paths the unseen wars. Bloodmoor's warlords crave your gift to shatter wards. Ironclaw. They seek to claim what I could not." His hand brushed hers as he added wood to the blaze, a touch resisted yet lingering, transforming fear's edge into a tentative bridge. Empathy bloomed, slow and sensorial, the heat of his skin against the cave's chill, the steady thrum of his pulse echoing her own, the scent of blood and smoke weaving an invisible cord. Outside, the Wivios grew bolder, paws crunching snow mere paces from the entrance, the enemy's breath fogging the night like accusations. Thorn rose, sword drawn, positioning himself between her and the threshold, his form a silhouette of unyielding resolve. Ilara's heart clenched, the bond humming with visceral urgency. She could not flee alone, not with visions whispering of paths entwined. She stood beside him, her healer's hands now clenched in determination. The crown's thorns, a crown of fire in the firelight. The first shadow loomed at the cave's mouth, a iron-claw scout, eyes gleaming feral red. And Thorn lunged, blade meeting claw in a clash that sprayed blood across the stone. Ilara moved without thought, her Pathfinder's gift surging unbidden, a glimpse of the attack's arc, the path to evade. "Left!" she cried, and he pivoted, felling the intruder with a strike that ended in a gurgle. More shadows stirred, the common enemy forging their fragile alliance in steel and instinct. As the skirmish raged, empathy deepened to bond, not love's bloom, but a redemptive tether, born of shared peril under the moon's watchful eye. Blood slicked the ground, mingling theirs in symbolic union, the fire's roar a hymn to choices yet unmade. In that visceral fray, Ilara felt the stirrings of acceptance, resisted no longer. Perhaps redemption lay not in crowns or thrones, but in standing against the storm, side by side. The cave's air hung thick with the copper reek of spilled blood, the fire's embers sputtering like dying stars against the encroaching dark. Ilara's hands trembled as she knelt beside the fallen scout, the iron-claw intruder's body a crumpled heap of fur and sinew, Thorn's blade buried to the hilt in its throat. Her gown, now a ruin of crimson smears and torn silk, clung to her skin like a second wound, the chill seeping through despite the blaze's faltering warmth. The crown's thorns pulsed hotter against her brow, drawing fresh blood that trickled warm and insistent down her cheek, a scarlet thread connecting her to the chaos they had wrought. Outside, the wind mourned with low howls, carrying the distant clamor of more pursuers, paws on snow, guttural snarls weaving through the pines like threads of impending doom. Thorn withdrew his sword with a wet rasp, the metal gleaming dully in the firelight, etched with runes that seemed to writhe like living shadows. He turned to her, his golden eyes fierce yet fractured, the guilt that had shadowed him now laced with a raw, unspoken awe. The bond thrummed between them, no longer a faint hum, but a visceral current, pulling at her core like the moon's tide on frozen waters. Ilara met his gaze, her breath shallow, the healer's instinct warring with the surge of something deeper, an awakening, unbidden and terrifying, stirring in her blood like embers long banked. "You saw it," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper that cut through the cave's stifling silence, stepping closer until the heat of his body chased the cold from her bones. The path of his strike, How? His hand hovered near her face, as if to wipe the blood from her skin, but he hesitated, respecting the chasm of her resisted trust. Empathy had forged their refuge into this fragile sanctuary, but now curiosity burned brighter, demanding truths neither had voiced. The fire crackled, casting his features in stark relief. The scar along his jaw from old betrayals, the melancholy lines of a king who had chosen duty over heart, now etched deeper by the night's revelations. Ilara pressed a hand to her temple, the crown's weight a living thing, its silver veins glowing faintly as if feeding on her pulse. The Pathfinder's gift, whispered in ancient lore as the goddess's veiled favor, had always been a shadow in her veins, a healer's intuition sharpened to glimpses of fate's weave. But here, in the cave's womb-like depths, amid the blood and fire, it unfurled like a rose in thaw, petals of vision blooming unbidden. She closed her eyes, and the world splintered, not the stone walls around her, but paths radiating like lunar rays, Thorn's blade arcing left to fell the scout, a fork where hesitation would have meant death for them both. Further still, visions cascaded, the citadel's halls awash in flame. 3 kingdoms' banners clashing under a blood moon, and at the center, her own form, crowned and unbowed, unraveling the veils of deception that bound the realms. Her breath hitched, the cold air sharp in her lungs, scented with smoke and the earthy musk of the cave's hidden springs. "It's always been there," she murmured, opening her eyes to find his face inches from hers. The bonds pull a magnetic ache she could no longer rationalize away. Fear coiled tight, a serpent in her chest. This power had marked her for the throne, for exile, for war. Yet in his stormy gaze she saw not rejection, but recognition, the ethical weight of a king perceiving the destiny he had unwittingly unleashed. The coronation stirred it. Paths. I see them, Thorn. Futures woven in the moon's light, choices that could shatter or save. He knelt before her, the fire's glow illuminating the blood-streaked fur of his cloak, a symbol of the wild throne he had fled. His hand finally bridged the distance, calloused fingers brushing the blood from her cheek, the touch igniting sparks along her skin. Warmth amid the frost, a tenderness born not of passion, but profound necessity. "The key," he breathed, his voice laced with the melancholy of revelations too late. "The elders spoke of a Luna who paths the unseen, who mends not just flesh, but the fractures of fate. I crowned you to bind the pack's shadows, but you are the light that unmakes them." Guilt flickered in his eyes, a storm cloud over gold, for he had denied this truth in the rite's haste, rationalizing the bond as mere ritual, the exile as mercy. Now it stared back at him, undeniable, her gift the thread that could weave redemption from the tapestry of war. The visions pressed harder, visceral and unrelenting, Shadowpine seers chanting in mist-shrouded groves, their prophecies twisting her image into a weapon to topple thrones. Bloodmoor's warlords forging blades in volcanic fires, hungering for the blood that crowned her to fuel their conquests. Ironclaw's Alpha, a hulking shadow with eyes like coals, leading the vanguard that even now encircled the mountains. Ilara gasped, clutching Thorn's arm, her nails digging into his flesh as the crown burned, its thorns a crown of fire and blood. The cave seemed to narrow, the stone walls echoing with phantom wivios, the packs converging, drawn by the artifact's pulse, her power a beacon in the night. "What is destiny, if not the choice to wield it?" she whispered, her voice trembling with the philosophy that had sustained her through rejection's chill. The bond deepened, empathy transforming into a profound acceptance, resisted no longer. His touch anchored her amid the vision's torrent, his ethical core a mirror to her own. Compassion over conquest, mercy as the true strength of alphas and omegas alike. Thorn pulled her closer, his embrace a bulwark against the encroaching storm, the scent of his blood mingling with hers in the air, a symbolic union under the moon's fractured gaze. Outside, the wind rose to a savage crescendo, snow lashing the entrance like accusations, but within, the fire held, illuminating the truth. She was no mere exile, but the key to his fractured kingdom, the pathfinder whose light could redeem or raise it all. Yet as the visions faded, leaving her drained and hollow, a deeper dilemma stirred. To embrace this gift meant binding her fate to his, to the war's maw, forsaking the freedom of solitude. Thorn's eyes searched hers, the weight of realization heavy. He had marked her as Luna, but now saw she could unmark the scars of his guilt, if only she chose. The cave fell silent save for their shared breaths, the fire's embers a quiet witness to the spiritual precipice they teetered upon. Blood from the crown dripped onto the stone, pooling like an offering to the goddess. And in that crimson mirror, Ilara glimpsed not just paths, but the ethical forge of her soul. Power as burden, love as the ultimate revelation. Like if you believe rejection can become destiny. The cave's fragile sanctuary shattered like frost under dawn's first cruel light, the wind's dirge swelling to a symphony of snarls and steel as the pursuers breached the outer wards. Ilara's visions lingered like smoke in her mind, paths forking into oblivion, rivers of blood carving through the mountains, thrones toppled under banners of iron and shadow. The crown's thorns burrowed deeper, a relentless pulse sinking with her racing heart, its silver gleam now a defiant flare against the encroaching grey. Thorn stood at the entrance, his silhouette a bastion of scarred resolve, sword raised as the first wave of Ironclaw warriors spilled into the ravine below, their eyes burning red with the fervour of conquest. She rose beside him, the cave's stone floor gritty against her bare feet, the chill seeping upward like accusations from the earth itself. Blood from her temple traced warm paths down her neck, mingling with the sweat of fear and the faint acrid residue of the dying fire. The bond thrummed insistent, a silver thread weaving through her veins, pulling her toward him even as her spirit recoiled from the precipice. Freedom whispered in the wind's howl, solitude in the wilds, unburdened by crowns and kings, but the Pathfinder's gift revealed the cost. Packs scattering like leaves in storm, the citadel's spires crumbling to ash without her light to guide the weave. What was liberty if it left the innocent to slaughter? Empathy for Thorn warred within her, his guilt a mirror to her own fractures, the ethical king who had forged her chains, now offering his hand to break them. The assault came swift as a blizzard's lash. Ironclaw's alpha, a hulking brute named Grimfang, led the charge, his fur matted with the frost of northern marches, eyes like smouldering coals fixed on the cave's mouth. He was no mere rival, betrayal's architect, the shadow who had whispered poison to the council, turning loyalties with promises of shared spoils. "The Luna's light is ours," he bellowed, his voice a thunderclap that echoed off the granite walls, rallying his warriors, 20 strong, claws glinting under the fractured moon, as they scaled the slopes with predatory grace. Thorn met them head-on, his blade singing through the air, felling the first with a strike that sprayed arterial red across the snow, staining it like spilled sacramental wine. Ilara's breath caught, the metallic tang invading the cave's confines. Her body moving on instinct as the bond surged. She glimpsed the paths, Grimfang's flank exposed in a feint to the left, Thorn's guard dropping if she hesitated. "Now, his ribs!" she cried, her voice cutting through the fray like a healer's incantation. Thorn pivoted, driving his sword home, but the alpha twisted away, roaring as claws raked across the king's thigh, reopening old scars in a fresh bloom of crimson. Pain lanced through Ilara, echoed from the bond, her knees buckling as if the wound were her own. The snow churned to muddied slush under trampling paws, weavios rising in a cacophony that drowned the wind, the moon's light fracturing into shards on the blood-slicked ground. From the ridges above, reinforcements crested, shadow pines lithe scouts, their forms ghosting through the pines like mist, and Bloodmoor's berserkers, axes forged in volcanic fury, gleaming with runes of ancient hunger. The three kingdoms converged, not in alliance, but in a frenzy of rivalry, each scenting the crown's power as the key to dominion. Grimfang laughed, a guttural sound laced with madness, circling Thorn with warriors at his flanks. "You crowned her exiled king, but the goddess's favor bends to the strong. Her paths will map our conquests. Yield her and spare your wretched line." His gaze shifted to Ilara, hunger twisting his features, the air thickening with the reek of unwashed fur and iron resolve. Thorn staggered, blood pooling at his feet, yet his golden eyes burned unyielding, the melancholy of his rule forged into defiant fire. "She is no trophy," he growled, positioning himself between her and the horde, his voice a philosophical anchor amid the chaos. "Strength is not in claiming, but in choosing mercy over the blade's easy song." Ilara's heart clenched, the crown warming against her brow as visions cascaded. Forgiveness offered, Grimfang's paw stayed by a glimpse of his own lost kin. War embraced, the mountains running red with the blood of thousands, her freedom a pyre for the realms. The past confronted her in the fray, the citadel's chanting elders, the silken bonds of coronation, Thorn's averted gaze as exile's decree fell. Betrayal's roots ran deep, the council's turn a venom he had sown in desperate bids for peace, yet his ethical core shone through the guilt. A king who would bleed for redemption. She stepped forward, the snow biting her skin like needles, the wind whipping her hair into a dark banner. The bond pulled taut, resisted no longer. Love was no reward, but a trial rationalized in the heat of battle as the only path to healing the fractures they shared. "Grimfang," she called, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. The Pathfinder's gift, illuminating the Alpha's hidden wound, a brother's ghost haunting his ambitions, a path to peace if mercy prevailed. The moon reveals all scars. Turn back and live unbound by this hunger. He paused, claws flexing, the horde's snarls faltering as her words wove through the night like lunar threads. Thorn glanced at her, awe and sorrow mingling in his gaze. The weight of their entwined fates a spiritual forge, but Grimfang lunged, betrayal's blade unyielding, forcing the choice, strike with vision-guided fury, unleashing war's full tempest, or extend forgiveness, risking all for compassion's fragile crown. Ilara's hand rose, the air shimmering with unseen paths, blood from the thorns dripping onto the snow like an offering. Freedom tempted, flee into the storm, leave the kings to their thrones. But the bond's truth anchored her. Redemption demanded sacrifice, love the ultimate judgment. As claws descended, she whispered to the moon, "Let mercy be our blade," and the visions bloomed, revealing the ethical precipice where forgiveness could shatter empires or bind them in unlikely peace. The clash resumed. Blood and fire under the fractured sky, her soul teetering on the edge of war's maw, the crown's pulse, a heartbeat of destiny's unrelenting call. The fractured moon hung low, a silver sentinel over the ravine's bloodied maw, its light splintering across the snow like shattered vows. Ilara stood at the precipice, the wind's savage caress whipping her hair into a veil of midnight strands, carrying the acrid bite of iron and fury from the fray below. The crown's thorns had carved their deepest claim, blood flowing freely now, warm rivulets tracing her jawline to pool at her collarbone, a crimson sigil that marked her not as victim, but as architect of fates unwoven. Thorn fought beside her, his blade a whirlwind of steel and shadow, each swing carving arcs through the encroaching horde. But his form wavered, the gash in his thigh sapping strength like a river claiming the shore. The bond pulsed between them, a visceral thrum that echoed her heartbeat in his veins, transforming resistance into an inexorable tide. Grimfang's roar shattered the night, a guttural challenge that summoned his warriors forward. Ironclaw's brutes charging with claws extended, Shadowpine's scouts darting like spectres from the pines. Bloodmoor's berserkers bellowing incantations that stirred the snow into frenzied eddies. The air thickened with the metallic tang of spilling life, pores churning the white expanse into a mire of red and slush, Wivios rising in a dissonant chorus that drowned the wind's lament. Ilara's visions cascaded unrelenting, paths of slaughter where Grimfang's talons rent Thorn's throat, empires crumbling in cascades of flame and frost, alternatives flickering like embers, where Mercy's whisper stayed the blade, revealing hidden alliances forged in shared scars. The crown burned, its silver veins alive with lunar fire, urging her toward the choice that had haunted her exile, the renascimento of a world teetering on oblivion. She stepped into the storm's heart, bare feet sinking into the blood-warmed snow, the cold a distant memory against the inferno in her soul. Thorn glanced back, his golden eyes stormy with the weight of impending loss, guilt etched in the furrows of his brow like ancient runes. "Ilara, no," he rasped, parrying a Shadowpine arrow that whistled past her ear, the shaft embedding in the granite with a crack like breaking bone. But she pressed on, the Pathfinder's gift unfurling fully now, a tapestry of silver threads illuminating the chaos, Grimfang's hidden fracture, the ghost of a betrayed sibling fueling his rage, the rival Alpha's ambitions, veils of deception parting to reveal pacts unspoken, thrones built on the bones of the innocent. Freedom's siren call tugged at her. Slip into the shadows, let the kings devour one another, reclaim the wilds unburdened by crowns or bonds. Yet the ethical forge within rebelled. What was liberty, if it chained others to despair's wheel? Love, resisted and rationalized through nights of frost and fire, emerged not as balm, but as the trial's crucible, redemption's proof, demanding sacrifice for the healing of wounds deeper than flesh. "Enough!" Ilara's voice rang out, clear and resonant, cutting through the melee like moonlight piercing storm clouds. The horde faltered, claws hovering mid-strike, as her words wove the air with ethereal power, the crown's blood amplifying her plea into something divine. Grimfang wheeled, his coal-black eyes narrowing, fangs bared in a snarl that exposed the scar across his muzzle, a mark from fraternal strife, glimpsed in her vision like a thorn mirroring her own. "The moon bears all truths," she continued, her tone steady, philosophical in its quiet gravity, the wind carrying her essence like incense to the goddess. "Your wars claim not glory, but echoes of loss. Ironclaw's iron fist crushes its own kin. Shadowpine's shadows hide betrayals that devour from within. Bloodmoor's fire scorches the hearths it seeks to warm. I see the paths, forgiveness, where you stand as allies against the true veil, the ancient curse that pits brother against brother. Or this, rivers of blood under a dying moon, your legacy's ash in the snow." Thorn reached her side, his breath ragged, sword dripping scarlet onto the ground, where it mingled with hers in a symbolic communion. Blood, as the ink of destinies rewritten. The bond surged, no longer a chain but a bridge, his ethical melancholy aligning with her compassion's flame. He had been the broken king, guilt his eternal crown, but in her light he glimpsed absolution, not through conquest, but surrender to mercy's edge. Grimfang hesitated, the brute's massive frame trembling, the visions Ilara projected brushing his mind like lunar whispers. A brother's forgiveness, unclaimed, twisting ambition into isolation, The other alphas paused, their warriors' snarls softening to uncertain growls, the fractured moon casting long shadows that danced like spirits, urging truce. The choice crystallized in Ilara's core, a renascimento born of pain's alchemy. She extended her hand, palm upturned, blood from the thorns dripping onto the snow like an offering, the crown's pulse syncing with the knight's heartbeat. "Choose with me," she said to Thorn, her voice intimate, laced with the tenderness that had bloomed amid thorns. "Not as king and Luna, but as souls mending the weave." He sheathed his blade, calloused fingers clasping hers, the union a quiet thunder, sacrifice in yielding power, healing in the bond's embrace. Their shared wounds, a testament to love's redemptive forge. The air shimmered, her gift manifesting as a veil of silver light, unraveling the deceptions. Forged missives exposed, rival pacts dissolving like mist under dawn. Grimfang dropped to his knees, a guttural sob escaping his maw, the horde following in waves of bowed heads, Weavios shifting from war cries to mournful harmony. The three kingdoms' banners stilled, the war's maw closing not in victory's roar, but in the hush of revelation. Ilara felt the crown loosen, its thorns retracting like petals in thaw, the blood staunching as the moon mended overhead, whole and radiant. Thorn drew her close, his embrace a bulwark of warmth against the lingering chill, the scent of pine and hearth mingling with their mingled essence. Rejection's frost had yielded to this, a rebirth where power bowed to compassion, destinies entwined not by right, but by choice. The mountains stood sentinel, snow falling soft now, blanketing the bloodied field in white forgiveness, the fire of their union a beacon under the goddess's gaze. In that sacred silence, Ilara whispered to the wind, "Every wound heals in mercy's light, her spirit unburdened, the unwilling Luna reborn as the heart of realms renewed. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive."